3 fake HOA cops pinned her to their gate over a mailbox. They thought they were bullying another helpless family. They didn't know the wife was a former military police captain. The lesson was coming. The morning sun cast a deceptively peaceful glow over Willow Creek Estates, a suburban enclave where conformity was a competitive sport. Manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and perfectly trimmed hedges stood in neat, silent judgment. Inside one of these identical brick homes, former Army Captain Anya Sharma, at 38, was trying to embrace the quiet. After a decade as a military police officer, including 2 grueling tours in Iraq, the stillness of civilian life was something she both craved and distrusted. Her husband, Nathan, an art history professor with a gentle soul and ink-stained fingers, was the anchor to this new world. He was outside, a brush in hand, adding a touch-up of white paint to their front gate, humming softly. Anya watched him from the living room window, a small smile touching her lips. He was her peace. She was in her garden, kneeling in the soft earth, tending to the rose bushes that lined their walkway. The scent of damp soil and blooming flowers was a balm to a soul accustomed to the smell of dust and cordite. It was a perfect, ordinary morning. The kind of morning that makes you believe the past can stay in the past. The illusion was shattered by the sound of heavy boots on the pavement. 3 men, dressed in navy blue polos with a hastily stitched Community Safety Patrol logo on the chest, approached their property. The man in the lead was Mark Rendon, a stocky, bull-necked individual whose petty authority was immediately apparent in his swagger. Anya had seen him around, the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's oppressive neatness. "Morning, ma'am," Rendon called out, his voice dripping with condescending familiarity. "Gonna have to write you up for those." He pointed a thick finger at her rose bushes. Anya slowly stood, brushing the dirt from her knees. "Excuse me." Section 4, Subsection B of the HOA Bylaws. Approved flora. Your Crimson Glory roses aren't on the list. They'll have to be removed. Anya felt a familiar, cold prickle of annoyance. She had read the bylaws. She knew he was misinterpreting a vague guideline, twisting it into a mandate. "I believe that's a recommendation, not a requirement," she said, her voice calm and level. Her calmness seemed to infuriate Rendon. He thrived on intimidation, on the nervous compliance of his neighbors. A poised, articulate woman questioning his authority was not part of the script. He exchanged a look with his 2 cronies, a silent communication of shared grievance. "It's a requirement when I say it is," Rendon snapped, stepping onto the edge of her lawn. "You're trespassing, Mark," Anya said, her voice still even, but with an edge of steel now hardening it. "Please step back onto the sidewalk." "Or what?" he sneered, taking another step. "You gonna call your bookworm husband to protect you?" Nathan, hearing the raised voices, had put down his paintbrush and was walking towards them. "Hey, is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone placating. Rendon ignored him completely. His focus was entirely on Anya, on the woman who had dared to challenge him. It was a primal display of dominance. In one swift, shocking movement, he lunged forward. Anya's training had her ready to react, to counter, but his speed and raw aggression caught her off guard in this place of supposed safety. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. "Hey!" Nathan yelled, rushing forward. One of Rendon's men, a lanky youth with vacant eyes, simply shoved Nathan hard in the chest. Nathan, a scholar not a fighter, stumbled backward and fell to the lawn, stunned and breathless. It all happened in seconds. Rendon, fueled by a rage born of his own inadequacy, twisted Anya around and slammed her against the cold, hard bars of the wrought iron gate Nathan had just been painting. The impact stole her breath. He pressed his considerable weight against her, pinning her there. Another man grabbed her arms, wrenching them behind her back. The sharp edge of the gate's metalwork dug into her cheek, and the world narrowed to a tunnel of pain and an explosion of pure, white-hot fury. "You see?" Rendon's voice was a guttural whisper in her ear, his breath foul. This is our community. We make the rules here. You and your husband need to learn some respect." She could feel the cold metal against her skin, hear her husband's desperate shouts, see the blinds twitching in the windows of her neighbors' houses. But no one came out. No one helped. In that moment, she wasn't a decorated army captain. She was just a woman, pinned and powerless, a spectacle for the cowards hiding behind their perfect lawns. A cold, terrifying realization dawned on her: the war hadn't ended. It had just followed her home. The wail of a single police cruiser, arriving a full 15 minutes after a panicked neighbor finally called 911, did little to soothe the violent trembling in Anya's limbs. Rendon and his thugs had already released her and sauntered off, their work of humiliation complete. Nathan was at her side instantly, his face a mask of helpless fury and concern, his hand hovering over the angry red marks on her arms. The two local officers who responded were a study in practiced indifference. They listened with half-closed eyes as Anya, her voice tight with suppressed rage, recounted the assault. They took Nathan's statement. Then they walked over to talk to Rendon, who was lounging by his pickup truck down the street, laughing with his friends. The lead officer, a man with a tired face and a burgeoning paunch, came back over to them, flipping his notebook shut. "Look," he said, his tone suggesting he was doing them a favor. "This seems to be an internal HOA matter. A neighborhood dispute that got a little heated." "Heated?" Nathan's voice cracked with disbelief. "They assaulted my wife. They pinned her against that gate. I have fresh paint and her blood on my shirt to prove it." "Sir, I understand you're upset," the officer said, his gaze sliding past Anya as if she were a piece of furniture. "But Mr. Rendon claims you were the aggressor and that his patrol was simply restraining a hostile individual. It's a," he said, she said, "situation. My advice is to take it up with your HOA board." Anya stared at him, a cold, profound clarity settling over her. She saw the entire system laid bare in that one dismissive shrug. The official channels were a dead end. The law, as represented by this man, was a shield for the aggressor, not the victim. She had seen this same dynamic play out in dusty villages in Iraq, where local power structures protected their own, where justice was a commodity traded between men in positions of authority. To see it here, on her own front lawn, was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical blow. "Thank you for your time, officer," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. The officer, relieved to be dismissed, nodded curtly and retreated to his car. The system had done what it was designed to do, maintain the status quo. Later that evening, after refusing Nathan's pleas to go to the hospital, Anya stood in front of their bathroom mirror. Nathan gently documented the injuries with his phone's camera, the dark, finger-shaped bruises blooming on her upper arms, the angry scrape on her cheek where it had been pressed against the gate, the torn fabric of her shirt. She didn't cry. Her face was a stoic mask, but inside, a storm was gathering. As Nathan went to get the first aid kit, she leaned against the sink, her reflection staring back at her. The face in the mirror was a stranger's, pale, bruised, violated. The controlled calm she had projected for the police shattered, and for a moment, she was no longer in her quiet suburban bathroom. The memory was a flash grenade in her mind. The stifling heat of a Fallujah detention center. A high-value detainee, a man responsible for multiple IED attacks, spitting in her face, his eyes filled with the same arrogant contempt she had seen in Mark Rendon's. He had taunted her in Arabic, not about the war, but about her gender, about her perceived weakness. Her fellow male soldiers had shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. In that moment, she had felt utterly alone, an outsider in her own uniform. But she hadn't faltered. She had taken a deep breath, centered herself, and proceeded with the interrogation, her voice never wavering. She had used his arrogance against him, baiting him, letting his misogyny lead him into tactical errors, until he had given up the information she needed. She gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white, pulling herself back to the present. The two scenes, a decade apart, fused in her mind. The enemy was the same, men who used intimidation and violence to assert dominance over those they perceived as weak. Her husband's anger was righteous but unfocused. He wanted lawyers, lawsuits, a battle fought on their terms. But Anya knew better. You don't fight a guerrilla insurgency with conventional tactics. You don't fight bullies by appealing to a system they already control. A cold resolve solidified in her gut, displacing the fear and the shame. Rendon and his thugs had made a critical miscalculation. They thought they had assaulted a professor's wife. They had no idea they had just declared war on a decorated military police captain who had spent her career dismantling threats far more dangerous than them. This was no longer a civil dispute. This was a threat assessment. And the threat needed to be neutralized. Permanently. The next morning, Anya transformed her quiet suburban home into a forward operating base. While Nathan, still shaken, made frantic calls to lawyers who offered sympathetic but ultimately slow-moving advice, Anya began her own operation. The dining room table became her command center. She opened her laptop, the soft glow illuminating a face set with grim purpose. Her target, Mark Rendon and his so-called Community Safety Patrol. Her time in military intelligence had taught her that every enemy has a weakness, and information was the key to finding it. She began with open-source intelligence. A few targeted searches revealed Rendon's digital footprint was as sloppy as his physical demeanor. He was a 45-year-old former high school football star who had failed his police academy entrance exam 3 times. His social media was a cesspool of thinly veiled threats, posts glorifying vigilantism, and memberships in several neighborhood watch groups that bordered on extremist militias. He worked as a low-level security guard at a local mall, a job that clearly didn't satisfy his craving for authority. Next, she moved on to his 2 accomplices. Using techniques she had once employed to track insurgents, she cross-referenced photos from Rendon's social media with public records. The lanky youth was a 19-year-old named Kyle, a recent high school dropout with a history of petty vandalism. The third man, a burly figure named Dave, owned a struggling landscaping business and had a recent DUI charge that had been mysteriously downgraded to a lesser offense. A pattern began to emerge, a group of resentful, frustrated men, drawn to a charismatic bully who gave them a uniform and a sense of power they couldn't achieve in their own lives. While compiling digital dossiers on her targets, Anya simultaneously began to fortify her home. This was no longer about aesthetics, it was about tactical defense. She ordered a state-of-the-art security system, complete with motion-activated floodlights and high-resolution cameras that covered every blind spot on her property. She walked the perimeter, just as she had on the first day, but this time she wasn't admiring the view. She was planning fields of fire. She identified potential choke points, established fallback positions within the house, and planned emergency evacuation routes for Nathan. Her most important task, however, was a deep dive into the legal framework that gave Rendon his perceived power, the HOA bylaws. She printed out the entire 80-page document and spread it across the table. With a highlighter and a red pen, she began her analysis, her training as an MP captain taking over. She wasn't just reading the rules, she was deconstructing them, searching for the legal tripwires her enemies had laid for others, and which she could now turn against them. She found it on page 57, buried in dense legalese. A clause allowing the HOA board to form a volunteer patrol to observe and report infractions. But she also found the limitations they had ignored. The patrol had no authority to make physical contact, no right to detain residents, and was explicitly forbidden from carrying any item that could be perceived as a weapon. Rendon's plastic baton, his physical assault, every action he had taken was a gross violation of the very rules he claimed to be enforcing. Furthermore, she cross-referenced the state's criminal code. Their actions didn't just violate HOA rules, they constituted multiple misdemeanors and at least 2 felonies, assault and unlawful imprisonment. By the end of the day, she had a complete intelligence package. She knew their names, their weaknesses, their legal vulnerabilities. She had turned her home into a defensible fortress. And she had the law, the real law, on her side. She now had a clear understanding of the battlefield. The next phase was to engage the enemy, not with brute force, but with the one weapon they were utterly unprepared for, her intelligence. She closed her laptop, the plan fully formed in her mind. The hunt was on. 3 days after the assault, they came back. Anya had anticipated it. Bullies, once they've drawn blood, almost always return to reassert their dominance. She spotted Rendon's truck creeping down the street just after noon. This time, there were only 2 of them, Rendon and the young, impressionable Kyle. They didn't come to the door. They began a deliberate campaign of psychological harassment, walking the edge of her property line, holding up their phones, pretending to film her house, her lawn, her newly painted gate. It was a silent, menacing message: "We are still here. We are watching you. We own this space." Nathan saw them from the window, his face paling. "They're back, Anya. Call the police." "No," Anya said calmly, placing a hand on his arm. "We're going to handle this." She walked to her office and printed out 2 documents. The first was a cease and desist letter she had drafted herself, citing the specific state statutes for stalking and harassment. The second was a high-resolution, enlarged photograph of Kyle's recent vandalism charge from the public court records. She walked out the front door, not with anger, but with the unnerving calm of a professional entering a negotiation. She held her own phone up, its camera clearly recording. Rendon and Kyle stopped their mock filming, surprised by her direct approach. "Good afternoon, Mark." "Kyle," she said, her voice carrying easily across the lawn. The use of their names made both men flinch. "This is an official patrol," Rendon blustered, trying to regain control. "We're documenting potential violations." "No," Anya replied, taking a slow step forward. "You are engaging in targeted harassment, a violation of State Penal Code 2816-1. And you are doing it on my property, which constitutes criminal trespass." She held up the first paper. "This is a formal cease and desist notification. Any further contact will result in immediate legal action." Rendon's face turned a shade of mottled purple. "You can't threaten us." "I'm not threatening you," Anya said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm advising you." She then turned her attention to the younger man. "Kyle," she said gently, "did you know that a second conviction for criminal mischief, especially while engaging in what a court could easily construe as gang-related intimidation, often carries a mandatory minimum sentence? I'd hate to see that happen over something as silly as a disagreement about roses." She held up the second paper, the enlarged photo of his prior offense. Kyle's face went white as a sheet. He looked from the paper to Anya's cold, analytical eyes, and then to Rendon, his confidence evaporating. He hadn't signed up for this. "What? How did you get that?" he stammered. "I'm a very resourceful person," Anya said. She then looked back at Rendon. "You have a choice, Mark. You can leave now, and this is the last conversation we ever have. Or you can stay, and I can start talking about your 3 failed police academy applications, the real reasons for your dismissal from your last security job, and that interesting little online gambling habit that seems to be causing you some financial distress." Rendon stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The bully, stripped of his physical advantage, was just a loud, insecure man. He had no idea how she knew these things. He couldn't comprehend that she had used his own overconfidence against him, turning his digital life into a weapon. For the first time, he looked at her and saw not a victim, but a threat he could not understand. He grabbed Kyle by the arm and practically dragged him back to the truck. They sped away without a backward glance. Anya stood on her lawn, her heart pounding, but her hands perfectly steady. The first probe had been a success. She had sown discord and fear. She knew, however, that this wouldn't be the end. A cornered animal is a dangerous one. And she would be ready for the final attack. The psychological blow landed exactly as Anya had calculated. For 2 days, there was nothing. A tense, unnerving silence settled over the neighborhood. But Anya knew this was the calm before the storm. She had humiliated Rendon, exposed his vulnerabilities in front of his own subordinate. A man like that couldn't let it stand. His wounded ego would demand a violent response. Her surveillance cameras, now fully operational, became her eyes and ears. The attack came late Thursday night. 2 pickup trucks, headlights off, rolled to a stop down the street. 4 men, including Rendon and his core crew, got out. They weren't carrying clipboards this time. They carried baseball bats and tire irons. Their intent was no longer harassment, it was brute force. They were coming to break more than just HOA rules. As the first man stepped onto her lawn, the trap was sprung. The motion sensors triggered a series of high-intensity, military-grade strobe floodlights, instantly turning the night into a disorienting, blinding day. Simultaneously, a piercing, 130 decibel sonic alarm, the kind used for crowd control, screamed into the night. The men cried out, disoriented, their night vision destroyed. They stumbled, shielding their eyes, their coordinated plan instantly devolving into chaos. This was exactly what Anya had anticipated. Her strategy was to disorient, disrupt, and control the engagement before it ever reached her front door. From the darkened second-floor window of her home office, she watched them panic. Nathan was with her, huddled in the designated safe room as they had rehearsed. He was on the phone with 911, calmly reporting an active home invasion in progress, providing the dispatcher with a real-time description of the assailants and their actions. Rendon, bellowing with rage, managed to rally his men. "It's just lights. Get to the house," he screamed, charging blindly toward the porch. This was the final tripwire. This was the moment that legally transformed his actions from trespass to a direct, physical threat against her and her family inside their home. The front door opened. Anya stepped out onto the porch, a dark silhouette against the light spilling from her hallway. She held a Glock 19, her stance perfect, a two-handed combat grip. The strobe lights flickered across her face, revealing an expression of absolute, cold control. "Mark Rendon," her voice boomed, amplified by the night's strange acoustics. It was the voice of a captain commanding a chaotic battlefield. "You and your men are trespassing and attempting to commit a violent felony. I am armed. This is your final warning. Leave my property. Now. You bitch." Rendon screamed, and raised his tire iron, taking a step onto her porch stairs. The gunshot was a deafening crack in the night. Anya didn't aim at him. She didn't have to. She fired a single, deliberate round into the thick oak beam of her own porch roof, a few feet above his head. Splinters exploded downwards. The message was unequivocal. The next one will not miss. Rendon froze, his arms still raised, his face a mask of disbelief and sudden, stark terror. His men, who had been moving forward, scrambled backward, falling over each other to get away. In that frozen moment, the wail of approaching sirens sliced through the air. But this wasn't the slow, indifferent response from before. Deputy Jake Morrison, whom Anya had contacted earlier as a professional courtesy, providing him with a summary of the ongoing harassment, was leading the charge. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt at the end of the driveway, their red and blue lights washing the chaotic scene in a surreal glow. The police arrived to a perfect, undeniable tableau, 4 armed men, caught in the act of a violent home invasion, being held at bay by a single, resolute woman standing her ground on her own property. The men dropped their weapons instantly, hands shooting into the air. Rendon, his face ashen, slowly lowered the tire iron. It clattered onto the porch steps with a sound of final, absolute defeat. It was checkmate. The legal victory was as swift and decisive as Anya's defense of her home. With high-resolution video evidence of the initial assault, the subsequent harassment, and the final attempted home invasion, coupled with Nathan's clear 911 call and the responding officers witnessing the event in progress, Mark Rendon and his crew had no defense. They faced a litany of charges, from assault and stalking to felony burglary with intent to commit a violent crime. The media firestorm that followed exposed the rot within the Willow Creek HOA, leading to the immediate dissolution of the Community Safety Patrol and the resignation of the entire HOA board. The neighborhood, once a place of silent complicity, began to change. Neighbors who had once hidden behind their curtains now stopped by with pies and apologies. They spoke of their own quiet fears of the HOA's overreach, of Rendon's bullying tactics. They had been afraid, they admitted, and her courage had shamed them, but it had also inspired them. Anya and Nathan's life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. The house was theirs, truly theirs now, a fortress they had successfully defended. But Anya found that the quiet she had once craved no longer felt satisfying. The fight had reawakened something within her, her sense of duty, her instinct to protect. 6 months later, Anya stood before a packed town hall meeting. She wasn't there as a victim. She was there as an advocate. At the request of her neighbors, she had helped draft a new, legally sound set of HOA bylaws, ones that protected property values without infringing on personal liberties. More than that, she had used her experience to establish a non-profit organization, the Homefront Project. Its mission was to provide free legal advice and advocacy for homeowners, especially female veterans and their families, who were being targeted by abusive HOAs or predatory neighborhood groups. Her husband, Nathan, sat in the front row, a proud smile on his face. He watched as his wife, no longer a soldier fighting foreign wars, but a community leader fighting for justice at home, commanded the room with quiet strength and unshakable authority. She had faced down the darkness that had invaded her life and had transformed it into a beacon for others. Her new mission had just begun. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. It shows how professional skill, intelligence, and unwavering resolve can overcome brute force and intimidation. Anya's journey from a veteran seeking peace to a community protector is a testament to the enduring power of a soldier's spirit. What does the idea of defending your home mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage and strategy inspired you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who believes in fighting back. And comment strength to show your support.